This is the last video you'll ever have to watch on habit formation. Enjoy. There we go. We are going to be covering two books which I have distilled and synthesized the knowledge from in this habit formation guide, Atomic Habits and The Upward Spiral, which is a neuroscientific book about depression, but it includes some solid things about habit formation. This is my promise to you, in exchange for the time that you dedicate for this video in the next few minutes of your life. After watching this guide, you will have a complete understanding of how to set, stick to, and maintain good habits, whilst understanding how to break your bad ones forever. I'll give you the framework. You'll also learn how to achieve boundless progress in your life within the areas that are important to you. I'm not going to tell you what they are, that is completely up to you to decide. Let's go. This is the contents of what we're going to be covering. A quick story, which happened in 2020. Why bother with habits in the first place? Everything you need to know about the brain regions involved in habit formation, the neuroscience within 30 seconds. 4 reasons why goals alone don't work. Don't ask what, how, ask who. The 4 steps of habit formation, how to form a good habit, how to break a bad habit, environment, the Goldilocks rule, how to stay motivated forever in whatever you're doing. And then we're going to finalize with some extra tips on how to go from good to great in whatever habit you are following. 2020 story. There is me with long hair and a beard. In 2020, I used to live in Poland, and I was in a stage of life where COVID had hit. I was inside most of the time. I was living with my girlfriend at the time, and I just didn't have good habits. You can see the little journal in my pocket there. Your boy was still journaling and doing the self-improvement stuff. But as far as stopping my bad habits, which were always watching YouTube and how to actually start exercising more and be more dedicated to the things that were important to me, I had absolutely no idea how to do it. You can tell from my incredibly creased t-shirts. Your boy was a mess. And then one day, absolutely disgruntled at the fact that I had wasted another day just binge watching YouTube, I was on YouTube and I came across a video from a YouTuber who you might know called Better Ideas. And this video was all about how to stop checking your phone, because that was the problem I was dealing with the most at that time. But he mentioned a book in that video called Atomic Habits, and I instantly got the audio book, and it was like divine timing in the sense that COVID had just happened. I was inside and I finally started to gather the frameworks of what works with behavior change, how can I actually instill better habits within my life, and more importantly, how can I stop doing my bad habits. So I came across this video, came across the book, and then, long story short, got a bit ripped. I was very skinny at the time because I was eating vegetarian as well, so I had a lot of health choices that weren't gearing me towards flourishing health. And I got a habit tracker at that time as well. And I started tracking the 5 main habits that I wanted to adhere to, which was waking up early, practicing Polish as the language, eating healthy, doing a run or a workout each day, and stretching in the evenings as well. And that's what I dedicated all of my time to. And as you can see, most of the time it was all 100%. But I went from very skinny to in a decent shape. You know, I'm not the most ripped person, but what I want to highlight is I wasn't making any progress in my life until I came across the knowledge that I'm going to share with you in these slides. Next up, why bother with habits? This is one of my favorite sculptures. It is often attributed to the idea of self-development, and I very much feel it encapsulates what self-development is, because this piece of material is being sculpted out of what the material is, which is the person. So it captures the idea that with your habit formation, you are the material, but you are also the thing that sculpts that material into whatever form you want to sculpt it in. Arete. There is an idea in Greek thought or Greek philosophy called arete, which essentially means excellence. There is a quote that's misattributed to Aristotle. He put half of it, and then the writer Will Durant finished it off. Aristotle said, "Virtues are formed in man by his doing the actions." And then the writer Will Durant interpreted it thusly: "We are what we repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence is not an act, but a habit." It doesn't matter what you want to do. If you want to study more, if you want to work out, if you want to improve your social skills, if you're learning a language or you want to start doing deep work, anything that you want to do requires habit formation if you want to do it well. So this is what we're going into next. 30-second neuroscience. Let's see. Set your timers. Let's go. There are three main brain regions you need to know when it comes to habit formation: the nucleus accumbens, the dorsal striatum, and the prefrontal cortex. The only thing you need to know about these brain regions is they communicate with each other, but what they say is very different. The nucleus accumbens is the part of the brain which governs impulsivity, and it would say, oh, that cupcake looks delicious, because it just wants to do whatever is most impulsive right now. The dorsal striatum, this part in the middle, is not rational, nor is it a conscious part of the brain. It's a very old part of the brain in our evolutionary history, and it just wants to do whatever you've usually done in that scenario. So it would argue, let's do it this way because that's how we've always done it. But the prefrontal cortex is the most evolved part of our brain, and it gives us a huge evolutionary advantage over other animals because it is essentially what governs our behavior, and it is responsible for planning, decision making, but also worrying and other things like that. It would argue, but that won't help us get to where we want to go in response to the nucleus accumbens saying, oh, that cupcake looks delicious. Just like Congress members, when people were debating in politics, your habits are a result of these three brain regions communicating, but they don't always agree. Because if they always agreed, your habits would just be certain and you would always know what you need to do. Remember, oh, that cupcake looks delicious. Nucleus accumbens, let's do it this way because that's how we've always done it. Dorsal striatum, Trump. Prefrontal cortex, but that won't help us get to where we want to go. As we mentioned, the dorsal striatum is heavily responsible for encoding behaviors that you do now to then make sure that they become automatic and become habits. It just wants us to do what we've done before. You can imagine it like a train track. It's not really bothered about going off track or exploring any new adventures or new directions. It will just give you, we've done this before, so we can do this, or we did this in the past, so we can do this as well. It's not rational or conscious, as mentioned, so give you a little bit of a pass here for your bad habits. You're not exactly to blame for falling into your bad habits, because when you feel that urge to indulge in them, you're not necessarily acting rationally. It's a little pass from me. To control your impulses and to create better habits, this neuroscience is definitely going over 30 seconds, the prefrontal cortex, remember the front part of your brain, needs to program new behaviors into the striatum. Remember that, because we're going to come back to this later. Now we're moving on. Goals versus systems. Let's go. The 4 reasons why goals alone don't work, as according to James Clear in Atomic Habits. Number 1, goals restrict your happiness, because what, as the famous quote goes from Naval Ravikant, desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. Naturally, when we want to achieve something in the future, we just delay our happiness until we get it. 2, goals inhibit your future improvement. They help you win the game, but it's your systems that help you continue playing the game. Systems, a word used interchangeably for habits and processes. Number 3, winners and losers have the exact same goals. Remember when you was in school, everyone, most people, wanted to pass the test, but only a few people did, because the way they went about it was different in terms of their studying habits. Number 4, lastly, achieving a goal is only a momentary change, because the thing to consider is, okay, you achieve the goal, but what comes next? This is what we're going to focus on. Goals aren't all bad though. I don't want to paint the picture that they are absolutely terrible. Goals are governed by our prefrontal cortex to give us direction, to dictate what comes next. They help us win the game, but habits, systems, processes, they give us the feeling of progress where we continue playing the game. You can consider the illustration here of an infinity symbol indicating an infinite game rather than a finite symbol. For example, getting into a relationship is a finite game. It's a goal. But to continue being in a relationship is an infinite game, one that you will require habits of love and communication and date nights and all of that stuff in order to maintain it. To lose 10 kilograms is a goal. After you do that, you will likely slack off unless you substitute achieving that goal with the system. Okay? Staying in shape is the infinite game. Now let's move on to the most important thing throughout this whole presentation, in the confidence of me saying, if you just pay attention to this part, you'll be fine. Habit change is identity change. So don't ask what or how, ask who. Quote from James Clear here, the author of Atomic Habits. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. This captures a theme we're going to explore in a second. Moving on. I'm going to go down here a little bit. On the left, we have a very skinny guy. On the right, we have an absolutely jacked guy. The skinny guy, who wants to achieve the goal or instill the habit of going to the gym, could simply ask one question. Who is the type of person who could achieve that type of physique that he wants? He could ask, what would a gym goer do? What would a high-performing, testosterone-ly charged athlete do? Decide who you want to become when you're considering the habits you want to instill in your life, and then you need to work backwards, which we're going to cover in the next slide. You need to prioritize becoming the type of person over achieving the thing. Think of the identity you wish to form, then prove it to yourself through small wins. You can imagine we have two types of people here. It's just simply illustrated. This arrow in the middle, which gets this person from a state of diminishment where he doesn't have the habits or she doesn't have the habits that she wants to actually have in her life, and then becoming the type of person she wants to be. The path that dictates her progress is habits. One thing to note about identity is our brains call BS if we try to convince ourselves we're a certain type of person when we're not. For example, if I say I am the type of person who takes care of their health, but I never exercise or eat healthy, my brain will be like, yeah, right, no you're not. However, if I highlight with humility that I'm not that type of person yet, but I want to become the type of person who takes care of their health, I set that goal and then I prove it to myself through small wins with my habit formation. So for example, perhaps I exercise for 5 minutes a day, and then after I eat one bowl of vegetables and fruits for lunch with a high protein steak. Then I start to cast the votes in favour of I'm the type of person who takes care of their health, and a week of doing that becomes, oh, my brain is now working with me and not calling BS on everything I'm doing. An analogy here is to consider if we put, so they're potatoes on the left, in case your mind went to a dirty place. They are eggs on the right. Boiling water in the middle. Boiling water will soften a potato, but it will harden an egg, which is to say that if you try to instill habits within your life that aren't in alignment with who you actually are or who you want to be, they won't last. So although our personalities are very changeable, it makes sense to have an initial self-introspection to understand what habits you would naturally like to instill within your life. What that means, if you look at the example of exercise, because it's quite easy to look at, if you're not the type of person who likes going to a gym, but you want to become the type of person who takes care of their health and works out, trying to form the habit of going to the gym won't be congruent in alignment with who you actually are and your inner interests. But perhaps going to jiu-jitsu once a week or doing calisthenics or yoga is much more congruent with yourself. So habit formation does involve finding those activities which will make you soften rather than an egg and hard. The 4 reasons why goals suck and identity tick. We have covered those aspects. Let's move on to the next part. Let's get into the juicy stuff. How do you actually form a habit? The 4 stages of a habit, and without these 4 stages, no habit can be formed. And then we're going to reverse engineer these for how to break a bad habit. These 4 stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. Number 1, cue. The cue is the trigger. This is the thing that you see in your environment or the internal emotional state you notice inside that you want to change, which triggers you to move towards a certain activity governed by the neuromodulator dopamine. If you don't have a cue, then you're not going to have a trigger to start the behavior. Stage number 2 is craving. So we have the desire to change our internal state. And this is one thing you'll start to notice about all habit formation is when you want to perform a habit, you want to change your internal state into one that's different from the one you currently feel in terms of your emotions. Dopamine is then released in the nucleus accumbens in anticipation of doing this thing. If you don't have craving to do something, you don't have motivation. So if you imagine this guy, he's at work and he's thinking, feeling pretty bored, I feel a bit groggy. And he thinks, I can go to the gym in an hour at 4 when I finish work. And then he has the craving to perform that action. Point number 3 is the response. This is when you actually perform the behavior or the habit. If a habit is difficult to perform, as in there's high friction to do it, as in maybe you have to drive 2 hours to go to the gym and then you have to get changed and then you have to clock in and do all of this stuff, you won't perform it. Or it will be very difficult to sustain your performance of it. So, image here, this is the person actually walking into the gym to train. Number 4, this is the end of the habit after you've completed it, and this is the satisfying stage of feeling accomplished with yourself after having completed it. The thing to note here, in contrast to our boy down here who's just done his workout, if an action or a habit is not satisfying, you have no reason to repeat it. Now let's move on to the intricate details of how to form a good habit after having understood the 4 stages of habit formation. We have make it obvious in terms of the cue, make it attractive in terms of the craving, make it easy in terms of the response, and finally, make it satisfying to complete the reward. Let's go. Make it attractive. You need to highlight the reasons of why this habit would benefit you, so you can feel pulled towards doing it rather than dragged towards doing it. One of the few ways you can do this is using something called temptation building, where you pair an action you want to do with one you have to do. For example, if you want to instill the frequent habit of studying, but you're experiencing a little bit of resistance to do so, study with music, relaxing music so it becomes a more enjoyable process. Run while listening to a podcast if running alone isn't as enjoyable for you. Second of all, you can join a culture where this behaviour is the norm. Think about online communities. They're very popular now on school. The reason why these work so well is because you're gathered in a space with like-minded people who you know are also studying. Again, in the context of studying, you have videos online which is study with me for 6 hours, where some other nerd is studying with you. I say nerd, I'm a very big nerd. I'm probably the biggest nerd of all of us, so no disrespect there. There are 3 categories of people that you can associate with your habit formation. The close, the many, the powerful. The close are the people you have within your physical proximity. Maybe you have a friend who also wants to start going to the gym or learning a language or start studying. The many are the people online who you could reach out to, or the people at a local community you could get involved with. For example, your local jiu-jitsu community, people there are going to be like-minded. And then the powerful are the people who are the top performers in that field, who you feel inspired to emulate. Using the context of your desired sport, you might think of an athlete who is the star performer in that field at the moment, who you want to mimic your habit formation on in order to emulate their behavior. Third of all, you can create a motivation ritual. This is where you do something you enjoy immediately before you do something difficult. And from my experience, this works wonders. I did this when I was studying my first year at university, because sitting down to study is actually quite laborious and intimidating if you're thinking, I'm going to study for 2 hours. And also this really works with habit formation around language learning. For example, you could set the habit in a social context of walking into social situations or big groups or events, and every time you do, take a deep breath and smile. So you are tuning your behavior before you go in. Or one thing I do when I sit down to study Spanish each day for 30 minutes, I have a bit of dark chocolate or I eat an apple as I'm getting into the studying process for the first 2 or 3 minutes, and it's so much more enjoyable. A more philosophical way you can make things more attractive is through the use of images. So one thing that I really try and instill within myself whenever I'm reading alone is I think about how I'm extracting valuable wisdom and knowledge centuries ago from these books, and suddenly it doesn't just become, oh, I'm reading a book. It's, no, I'm having a deep conversation with deep thinkers, as an example. Number 2, make it obvious. One thing that you'll start to pay attention to after this slide, when all of this knowledge sinks in, is most people struggle in their habit formation because they just don't make things clear enough. You need to be clear. You need to use the sentence of this new habit you want to form with, I will, behavior, at, time, in location. So, I will study Spanish at 8 p.m. in my garden while sitting on the lounge chair with my phone. You need to give yourself as much clarity as you possibly can and not set vague goals. As we covered in another video, setting vague goals is very characteristic of people with depression, which means they don't achieve the goal and then they're more depressed, unfortunately. One thing you can use is habit stacking. If you want to create a positive flywheel where after you complete one habit, you then are flywheeled into the next one, use the sentence of, after current habit, I will new habit. After I practice Spanish in the garden on the lounge chair for 30 minutes, I will get up, clear the space, and do a 1 hour workout on the pull-up bar outside. Even though we're going to cover it in an actual section in a second, pay attention here to the importance of environment when it comes to making things obvious. If you look around my room for the little bit that I show you, all of my books are out. In the worst case, my phone is out, so that could lead me into some bad habits. You need to make your cues to your behaviour as obvious and out there as possible. For example, put your running shoes by the front door so you can always see them. Switch on a special lamp when it's time to study, or always keep your books by your bed. Very simple ways that you can facilitate your habit formation process. Now, key point. You do not lack motivation, you lack clarity. Going into what we just covered at the first point on that last slide. There is a special technique that Japanese train operators use, which is called pointing and calling. It's a technique you use in unconscious ways throughout your life as well. And this is where they literally say things out loud. They call the time of the train, when the next train is meant to come, in order to give everyone that they're working with clarity over what's going on and when. You might do this in unconscious ways when you're leaving your house. Let's imagine you're with your girlfriend and you're leaving. You might say, oh, have I got my keys, wallet, phone, passports? If you're about to go on a flight, this is how we do it. This is what you can do with habit formation as well to give yourself clarity. Be precise when you are implementing a new habit. I will, at, in. I will, behavior, at, time, in, location. Cannot tell you how important this is. You do not lack motivation, you lack clarity. Don't say, I want to practice Spanish later. What does that even mean? It means nothing. I will practice Spanish at 8 PM in the sun lounger in the garden with my phone. Boom. I want to read more or be healthier. They're great. They're really, really great. And the intention for yourself is awesome. You want to be healthier, but they're so unclear, it's laughable. Again, after I get in from work and close the door, I will make a cup of tea and sit down to read on my sofa at 6 PM. After I close the door, after I sit down, you need to give your brain as much clarity as possible. As much clarity as possible. Number 3, make it easy. You need to reduce the friction in order to perform the habit. And you can do so by instilling something called the 2-minute rule. Does what it says on the tin. You just perform an action when resistance is high for 2 minutes. That's all you need to do. And this, in the early stages of after you've clarified the type of person you want to become, this will really help you form the identity and cast the votes in your behavior. Being the type of person who's wise and reads a lot suddenly becomes, I'll read for 2 minutes every day. You can also prime your environment again, so it's easier for you to do this. Don't hide your workout clothes, don't make them really hard to reach. Don't go to a gym if the closest one is 2 hours away. Get some workout gear set up in your garden. And lastly, master the decisive moment. You need to win that moment of inspiration throughout the day where the choice to proceed into the habit is there, or the choice to actually go away from the habit is also there when you feel the resistance. These moments are key. For example, you can consider 2 couples. One couple, when they come in from work at 6 PM, they get changed straight into their running clothes and they go to the gym. The other couple comes in, puts all of their stuff down, sits on the sofa and just watches Netflix for the rest of the evening. Master the decisive moment. 4, finally, make it satisfying. What is rewarded is repeated, what is punished is avoided. And what this means for your habit formation is you need to instill something called positive reinforcement. Now, you'll notice that when the flywheel starts to get under the way and you're consistently performing your habits, the habit itself, the process, will become the reward. However, in the early stages, you can actually start to reward yourself in other direct ways. For example, on the habit tracker I showed you at the beginning of this guide, One of them for me was waking up at 6:15 every day when I was living in Poland. And the way I motivated myself at the beginning is, one, I put my phone in the kitchen, so I had to get up and walk out there and turn it off, and then I was like, oh, I'm by the toilet, might as well have a wee, and then I would have a shower and I'd be up. But I really was getting into reading at that point, so I said every time I wake up on time I can put £3 into a budgeting account on my bank, which I could then use at the end of the week to buy as many books as I wanted to. If I didn't wake up early, I couldn't buy any books. So not waking up early hindered my progress in something that was very meaningful to me. Also, you can use a habit tracker to track your progress as well. One thing, I have one here. I'd recommend getting like a squared notepad. They're really good. I put the goals here, and then I put my habit trackers here. So I only have 3 habits at a particular time now as well, because I think any more than 3 and you've got absolutely no progress in any of them. Remember, for new habits and behaviours to stick, they need to be encoded into the dorsal striatum by the prefrontal cortex so that they become automatic. And the way that we do this, bad news, good news, is through repetition. You're going to mess up again and again and again, and it will be tough to stick to this habit in the early stages, or not as tough if you follow all of the parts. But you need to remember that it will take time to actually encode this new behaviour into the dorsal striatum, because it is biased to doing what we've always done before. 2 principles for you to pay attention to here: fail and fail and fail, but less and less and less. I think that's a Dutch proverb. And then finally, fall down 7 times, but get up on the 8th, as the Japanese say. Now we've covered how to form a good habit. Now we're going to cover extra tips and environment design, because these are very important. Never miss twice. As I mentioned, life will happen and you'll have days where you don't want to do that habit. Maybe you're traveling, maybe something's come up, and for whatever reason you can't do this habit that you usually do. That's fine. Just make sure, sign a contract with me now, that you'll never miss 2 days in a row. Because missing 1 day is fine, that happens. But it's when we miss 2 days in a row that it then becomes a week, 2 weeks, a month, and suddenly we're not doing that habit anymore. Never miss twice. Keystone habits. Awesome point here. These are the cues or things that get you into the zone of doing a habit. For example, putting your running shoes by the front door, turning on your study light when it's time to study. Pardon me. Unfolding your yoga mat when it's time to stretch, cleaning your desk when it's time to study or record. These are the things that when you do it, signals to your brain, we're now about to do that habit, so it starts to gather that momentum of anticipation. I would say for every habit, think of 1 keystone habit. Waking up early keystone habits, for example, might be home by 10 o'clock every single night, turn all your lights and devices off by 10 p.m, and make sure you're up at 6 p.m. They become 3 keystone habits. Habit stacking. Turn that light off. This is really fun, and if this isn't me in the shower, I don't have that much hair, but this is something I do. After current habit, I will new habit. This is the sentence you want to create. This is where you combine 2 habits that don't require the same sensory output. So for example, don't combine writing and listening to a podcast at the same time, because they both involve verbal output. A good example of 2 habits you can perform at the same time, ticking both off the list, is running while listening to an audiobook or listening to a podcast in that language that you're learning. While I have a shower most of the time, listen to a Spanish podcast, so I can instill that habit, get my 30 minutes in while I'm doing something else. How you implement this is you make a list of all of your current habits, and then you make a list of the things that happen to you each day, just normally, and then you search for the best place to include that new habit. You can use the framework here, of course understanding the cue, craving, response and reward, to do things after one another, because remember, habit stacking is usually when you do it at the same time, but doing it after one another is when you create these positive flywheels. So after you work out, you then have a nutritious meal. I'll show you on the next screen. Yeah, flywheels. Positive flywheels are things that kickstart you into forward momentum. It creates a logic where I can't help but sentence. When you work out, you can't help but eat nutritious food, which means you can't help but go to bed early, which means you can't help but wake up energized and work out more, and suddenly the process goes round and round and round. That's how you can use this framework to understand what are the habits that link into each other that will give me the best chance of gaining forward momentum into my life. Have a think. How to like doing hard things. I like that. It's basically saying no to alcohol. In terms of the language that you can use, language is a really important factor when it comes to habit formation. Change the word have to get. Think of these two examples. I have to wake up early tomorrow. I get to wake up early tomorrow. In fact, I was talking to my cousin yesterday and we was talking about how we're both YouTubers and we get to wake up and make videos. And suddenly it clicked in my mind again where I thought, oh my God, it's a privilege. When you use the sentence, I get to do whatever you're doing, it becomes a privilege rather than a chore. Also, change I can't for I don't when battling temptations. I can't signals external force is contributing to the reason you can't do something. When you say I don't, I'm going to give you examples on the next screen, it signals it's our decision or personal choice to not do that thing. Think about these. Even close your eyes and just listen to how different these sound. I can't eat chocolate. I can't come out tonight. I can't drink. Maybe the reasons would be, I can't eat chocolate, I'm on a diet. I can't come out tonight because I've got work. I can't drink, I'm 30 days sober. Rather than, I don't eat chocolate. I don't party. I don't drink. What you're indicating in the last few examples is, I'm not the type of person who eats sugary things. I'm the type of person who takes care of their health. I don't party. I'm the type of person who's focused and disciplined. I don't drink. I'm the type of person who takes care of their health. Again, another few examples of how language can be really powerful and impactful when it comes to habit formation is, don't say, again, I have to go for a run this morning. Of course, say I get to go for a run, but you can change the attractiveness of the habit that you're doing. Rather than saying I have to go for a run, you might say it's time to build some speed and endurance. Suddenly the dynamic becomes very different and it's almost excitable. Saving money, you can start associating that not with limiting your freedom, but expanding your freedom because you'll have more wealth in the future. Saving now increases your funds for next month. Lastly, if you're doing a public speech or something of that sort, or you're just facing a nerve-wracking situation, frame it in your mind with your language. Instead of saying, I'm terrified, I'm feeling really nervous, this is all going to go wrong, say, when you get that feeling of nerves, which is the same biochemical feeling of excitedness, I feel excited and ready, and I feel an adrenaline rush to help me concentrate. And that will help you frame the interaction much better. Environment design. Two analogies for you here. Self-control and willpower, by the way, are short-term, and they're not good things to rely on when it comes to habit formation. Photo number 1 is a water pressure system, which increases the water pressure. If you're not paying attention to how your environment is designed, you try to increase the pressure of your habits by increasing your willpower and motivation, which just leads to tension and revenge bedtime procrastination. However, in the second instance, if you untie the hose and release the tension and the pressure, what you're doing is you're designing your environment so it's as easy as possible for you to do your good habits and avoid your bad habits. Remember, your habits must fit into the natural flow of your life. Environment design. On the left, he has his phone next to his bed. On the right, he has a book. My boy, Alex Hormozi. Look at that devilish look. Alex Hormozi is great at this. The thing to know about environment design is new environments help us escape the subtle cues and triggers which usually lure us into our bad habits. And your options as to what you do behaviorally are constrained by what you have available in terms of your cues, which trigger your action or your desire to want to act. When you're going to do a new habit, especially if it's in your house, go to a new place, go to a new room, go to a new place or spot in your room to perform that habit. For example, when I was starting to meditate when I used to live in Poland, I went to a specific corner of the room and I sat on a specific cushion. I only study in the garage or downstairs. I don't necessarily study in my room because I'm either sleeping in here or recording videos. Also, what is important is to not create residue from previous habits. When you finish one habit, clear the space and go and do the next one. So clear your desk after you study. Don't leave your things out all of the time. Of course, leave them out so you can see the cues and your books and everything, but don't leave it spread out on the table. Make sure you clean so that you can roll into the next habit if it requires that same space. Again, remember the keystone habits of priming your environment so it signals to your brain it's study time, it's practice language time, it's workout time. Let's go. Now we've covered the extra tips and environment design. Next part, how to break a bad habit. Let's go. The main thing to note about your bad habits, one, we're going to reverse all the points we did to form good habits. You just reverse engineer it. But your brain did not evolve to smoke cigarettes, play video games, eat sugar, or whatever bad habit you're currently doing. It evolved to reduce stress, relieve anxiety, gain social acceptance, and nourish the body and maintain health. That is one key breakthrough with breaking bad habits. You're not wired to do this thing. You're wired to relieve whatever emotional distress you feel by doing that habit. Underlying your bad habits are emotional distress or stress in general that you're trying to cope with. Your habits are modern solutions to ancient desires, so once a habit successfully meets an underlying desire, you will crave the habit and perform it again. Life is predictive, not reactive. Fighting your impulses alone, the analogy here, is as if you're fighting off a zombie horde, which is infinite and they're not going to run out, but you have limited bullets. Eventually, you're going to get eaten and you're going to give in to your impulses. So you need to understand habit formation in order to solve this problem. Now it's time to engage your prefrontal cortex. Remember the slides we covered at the beginning of this presentation, let's call it? The three brain regions that are most important: the nucleus accumbens, the dorsal striatum, and the prefrontal cortex. Remember, the nucleus accumbens just wants us to act impulsively. Oh, that cupcake looks delicious. The dorsal striatum wants us to do whatever we've done before. Let's do it this way because that's how we've always done it. But the prefrontal cortex, when we have a goal and a direction we want to achieve, is what steers us on course towards achieving it. Now, the way to overcome bad habits is we need to snap ourselves out of the impulsive ways of acting that we have governed ourselves into, and our unconscious following of whatever coping mechanisms we've done in the past to now do them again, which is what the dorsal striatum leads us into. None of these brain regions are bad, by the way. They all work together, as mentioned. It's just the way that we overcome bad habits is we need to engage the conscious, rational, directional decision-making part of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, so it can inhibit the bad actions that the nucleus accumbens and the dorsal striatum lead us into. Oversimplifying neuroscience, but anyway. We break bad habits by reverse engineering everything we did to form good habits. We reduce the exposure, we make it unattractive, we make it difficult, and we make it unsatisfying. Number one, Drake meme, everyone do it? Remove all the cues to your bad habit. You cannot eat an ice cream you don't have. You can see two examples with the fridge. If you want to start eating healthily, you fill your fridge with healthy things. Get rid of all the unhealthy stuff. Now, I understand if you live with other people, this might be quite hard. When I was young, I was trying to do the same with stopping eating sugar, but I lived with my mum, who didn't really give a toss about breaking that habit. So what I would say is reduce the exposure you have to the cue as much as you possibly can, but not all is lost if you can't do so fully, because these next parts will help you. Number two, make it unattractive. Highlight the reasons why avoiding this habit is a net benefit to your life, and highlight what the consequences are if you engage in this habit and continue to do it. Really, really meditate on it. Doesn't matter what bad habit it is, really paint it in the most negative way you possibly can. And then join a culture, if possible, where the behaviour is collectively seen as unattractive. For example, NoFap, Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever it is. By the way, little hack, grayscale your phone to make going on your phone even more unattractive. That's an example. Number three, make it difficult. Going back to environment design. Increase the number of steps required to do this bad habit. For instance, if watching Netflix for you is a problem, remove your TV. Or just remove your TV from your room. So you have to go downstairs, you have to get it out, you have to plug it in. Suddenly, watching Netflix becomes this really laborious thing and you pick up a book instead. Well, hey, remove all unhealthy food from your house, of course. Block websites on your phone. Or place your phone above your wardrobe, somewhere really high, or outside in a garage, or just switch it off. I know Andrew Huberman, when he was working in his research lab, would go in each day and give his phone to one of his colleagues and say, I'm not allowed this back until 5 p.m, and if I ask for it back, I have to pay you $1,000. That's an example. Number 4, lastly, bit of an extreme photo, that one. Don't know why I put that one in there, but anyway, make it unsatisfying. Add instant consequences for performing that action. An example, if you binge eat biscuits, remove all of your money from your savings account. Get an accountability partner and allow them to cash a cheque of £500 if you do this bad habit. If you really want to not do this thing, it doesn't matter if you take extreme measures. Write out a cheque, give it to your most trusted friend or family member and say, if I do this thing, if I smoke, if I binge eat, if I miss a day of working out, if I fap, whatever it is you want to stop doing or start doing, if I miss a day or if I do it, you can cash this check. The last thing I wanted to mention, mainly from a neuroscientific point of view, is all of your bad coping mechanisms, all of your bad habits that you do that you currently don't want to do are triggered by stress. So when you really understand this principle that we mentioned in this part of the slide, that your brain did not evolve to smoke cigarettes, play video games, eat sugar. It evolved to reduce stress, relieve anxiety, gain social acceptance, and nourish the body and maintain health. You can just start to understand that if you smoke cigarettes when you're stressed, if you scroll when you're bored, if you address the underlying problem, which is boredom or stress, in a more constructive way, you can then replace your bad habit with a good habit. And of course, it takes time to actually do so, which you'll have to respect the process. What this might look like is if you fap when you're stressed, or if you scroll when you're stressed, or if you binge eat when you're sad, just replace that with a better way of dealing with that stress or that sadness. Instead of fapping, you go for a run. Instead of scrolling, you meditate. Instead of binge eating, you call a friend while on a walk. Replacement is the key. Let's finalise, because we've covered how to break a bad habit, almost at an hour. The Goldilocks rule, how to stay motivated in life and in whatever you're doing, especially with your habits. Quick question. Doesn't matter whether you have boxing experience or not. Doesn't matter whether you've never punched anything in your life. Let's say you are an average boxer, okay? You go twice a week. Which one out of these 3 people do you think you'd have the most challenge facing in a boxing ring? You got a little kid, you got an average boxer, and you got Canelo Alvarez, who's one of the best pound for pound boxers in the world. Number 1 would be too easy. Canelo would bite your head off, but number 2 would give you an adequate challenge because he would be at your same level. Think about it again in the context of tennis. Who do you reckon you'd beat? A little girl? An average man? Or Serena Williams? Probably you'd have most challenge facing this guy, Jerry. So, you need to make sure that your habits, in order to make progress and stay motivated in them, are not too hard, but they're not too easy, they're just right. The way to conceptualize this is there's a principle in neuroscience, it's called like the 85-15 rule. When you're practicing something, in order to maintain motivation to do it, you want to be failing around 15% of the time. In the context of language learning, let's look at it. During a 30-minute study session, you want to be making mistakes 15% of the time to make sure you're continuously learning, but it's just enough of a challenge not to dishearten you. Because if you're failing 90% of the time, you're going to have to be quite resilient to keep motivated in what you're doing. You'll learn loads because you're making a lot more mistakes, but the point is valid that whenever you're practicing something, aim for 15% of the time you are failing in order to maintain progress. There's a famous quote from Steve Martin, who is mentioned in Atomic Habits, and he was a famous comedian. 10 years spent learning, 4 years spent refining, and 4 years as a wild success. Stick to the Goldilocks rule and work on tasks of just manageable difficulty. Measure your progress and also receive immediate feedback whenever possible, which links us in to our next point now the Goldilocks rule is done. The importance of habit reviews. My boys, Come on, you Gunners. I had to. Sorry if you don't support Arsenal, but you know, your boy had to do it. When a measuring technique becomes the aim of the habit, the technique no longer serves you. And what this means is, let's imagine, in order to track your habit, you're using an app to tick off the days you performed the habit, or you have a habit tracker, like I have here. But you only do the habit in order to tick off those days. If that's the case, you need to review your system, because you're now optimizing for the wrong thing. So you need to fall in love with the process of the habit that you're doing and just treat yourself as an engineer, where every now and then you check in to see how often you've done it and to see what needs working on and what needs tweaking. Think about it this way. 80% of you, in terms of productivity and habit formation, is a plane. 10% is the pilot, the prefrontal cortex, deciding what direction you're going towards and what the goal of your habit formation is. 10% is the engineer. That is where you tweak what needs tweaking in the plane, you check up on your energy levels, and you do reviews so you can see what's working and what isn't. Man is alive and changing, not rigid and stiff, leading into our next point on this slide. With identities, there's one thing that you can do to prevent yourself from tripping up by forming the wrong identity. Don't form rigid identities. For instance, if your doctor tells you that you have severe health problems, but your identity is that you're vegan, his suggestions that you need to change your diet are going to contradict an identity that you have. So in this case, it would be much better to have the identity of, instead of I'm a vegan, I am someone who takes care of their health and the planet. And then if you have to change your diet, you can. And it doesn't completely coincide and shatter one of your identities. Last two slides now, the importance of a habit review. As mentioned briefly in the last slide, the good thing is that you form effective habits that you stick to throughout your habit formation. The only bad thing is that these habits can become too automatic, so you neglect how to improve and how to instill more errors, so you're making more progress. I've had this many times throughout my life with learning Spanish, where I've just got into the routine of practicing what I already know, feeling like I'm making progress, but then realizing I'm not, I'm just wasting my time because I'm doing the same thing. All I needed was a tweak. I needed to activate my engineer mindset. So make sure you review what's working at least once a week or once a month and tweak what needs to be tweaked. And you can do so by asking these questions in your review. What went well this week? Maybe you do a bit of journaling. How am I living or working with integrity right now? What did I learn? What are the core values that drive my life and work? And how can I set a higher standard in the future? If you ask these questions, most importantly, what went well this week and what did I learn? Also instill in one more, is there anything I would change in order to improve my processes next week? Then you'll experience all the progress in the world. We've covered everything. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Hopefully it was worth it. To support the channel, continue supporting the videos, as long as they're good, of course. Don't blindly follow the habit. I'm currently working on some projects which are going to be released next year. They're going to be 2 courses and hopefully some books in the works as well, all about social skills and mental flourishing. They're going to be synthesizing everything that I'm learning at the moment. I'm doing like 3 hours of study a day about those 2 topics, social skills and mental flourishing. So wait for them. They can be great ways to support the channel. Also feel free to join the free newsletter in the description. Other than that, stay disciplined, playful, and dangerous. Adios, muchachos.